So I misused substances as a teenager, even though I wasn't always aware that that's what I was doing. I grew up where it was common to be told that life was hard, and you use substances to cope, that's what you did. Not drugs, but more alcohol. And so I had a lot of trauma growing up as a child, and into my teenage years, that I started using all kinds of substances to cope with. I did have a period of stopping that and getting clean, but I just pretended like that whole part of my life never existed, and never dealt with the trauma. And so I went to college, was working on my bachelor's degree, and got into an abusive relationship with my son's father. My mom also had a back surgery where the doctor cut her spinal cord on accident, and had many complications with that. So there was access to a huge amount of pain medications. I suffered from migraines at the same time, and had tried to start therapy to kind of deal with those issues, but was doing it at James Madison University. And so it kind of opened that whole can of worms, and then my person graduated. And so I was kind of left with all this stuff that I just pretended never existed. And so it started with casually using pain medications for the migraine headaches, and then I started kind of taking them as a release and as a coping mechanism. I don't really think that she was aware of what it was doing to me. And so I was asking for them and she was giving them to me. And eventually it kind of took over, and I started taking them on my own. Started taking a lot of them, and just kind of lost control. And then I got pregnant. And so when I got pregnant with my son, it was starting to catch up with me that I was taking all of her medication, and she kept coming up negative on drug tests at her pain management clinic. And so I was risking some legal charges for that if I continued to do that. And so I didn't, because of my son, I didn't want to go and find them out in the street, and so I turned to alcohol. And so alcohol, my drug of choice is pain medication, but alcohol is really what tore me down really bad and made me, I was still functioning, I was still an addict, but I was able to do work from time to time on the pills, but alcohol, I was just unfunctional. And that is where I started really declining and really losing a lot of everyday living, and got to the point where my son was taken from me. I think that I knew that I was out of control, and that my drinking and my life was chaotic, but I think that I was still in the mentality that, like, you don't understand what I've been through, and so this is just a product of the things that I have experienced. And so I didn't think I needed to go to rehab. I only went to rehab because the guardian ad litem told him that's what I would need to do to get him back. Even in rehab, I remember thinking, like, I'm not an addict. I know that I have become physically dependent upon these substances because I have chosen the wrong thing to use to cope. But once I have this period of sobriety, I'll be fine. I acknowledge that I had become physically dependent, and that's what kept me using every day, was that physical dependence, because I would get sick if I didn't. But I didn't realize the impact of the mental aspect of addiction, and didn't truly identify as an addict until after getting out of rehab. I drove straight to an ABC store. So after rehab, I drove straight to an ABC store, and I spent the next 2 days completely intoxicated. And I knew that that was not the life I wanted to live. So I called my grandfather. He had told me that as soon as I helped myself, he would help me. And so I asked him to help remove me from the situation that I was living in, because I knew I couldn't stay sober there. And while I was waiting for him and my uncle to figure out when they were going to come and get me and help me remove myself from that situation, I drove to the store to buy some cigarettes, and I wrecked my car. And so they picked me up from jail, and I did from jail, left with them, and tried to do it on my own. I went to the CSB out of Harrisonburg, Rockingham, and so I was going to some therapies there, but I still wasn't truly understanding the severity of the addiction that I had, and the mental aspect of it. So I was kind of like what they would call white knuckling it, and I just wasn't being successful. I kept relapsing. I kept doing unwise things, putting myself in unwise circumstances, and I knew that if I got caught, I wouldn't get my son back. And so I was already mentally feeling like I was not going to be able to stay sober. I had PTSD, and so I knew that I could not handle my mind sober. And I knew if I didn't stay sober, I would never get my son back. And so those thoughts were already going through my mind. And then I had an outside influence, affirming that you're never going to stay clean. When are you going to ever get it together? And so I was already thinking that. And as soon as they kind of, brought that up to my mind, I was like, they're right. I'm never going to be able to do this. And so I ended up trying to take my own life. And so I woke up 3 days later on life support, and I knew that I should not have survived that. And so when I woke up, I knew immediately that something had saved me. And I believed that thing was, the Lord. And so on that bed, I promised him that I had been trying to do life my way. And even taking my own life, my way of doing things didn't work. And so I clearly didn't know what I was doing. And so I promised that I would start doing things his way. And I would consider that the turning point for me, is surviving that and knowing that there was something bigger than me pushing me forward. And so from there, when I got out of the hospital, I started going to the therapies that I've been going to, but I also started going to AA. And all of the support groups that I could find, because I couldn't trust myself alone. So I just had to fill my time, because if I was left to my own time, I would make the wrong choices. My grandfather would babysit me. I literally didn't spend any time alone. So we would ride together. We'd go look at fields, and I spent probably 15 to 20 hours in therapy a week. And so, yeah, my grandfather followed through on his promise of helping me once I took that first step of helping myself. And so I had someone who gave me a place to stay so that I could take a job that maybe didn't pay enough and I didn't have to work full time, so that I had the ability to go to the amount of therapy and groups that I needed to go to. I mean, for me, there was a whole supernatural, relationship with the Lord aspect of it. I believe that it took both. And so there are very practical things that I learned in therapy. And in my groups, I did a women's support group for those with PTSD who use substances to cope. And so that was a 3 to 4 hour class every week for 18 weeks. And I did that twice. And so I learned a lot of and I did individual therapy on top of that. And so I learned a lot of healthy coping skills, a lot of healthy techniques. Mindfulness was the most important one to me, and that's what I share with other people, because with PTSD, my mind ran all the time, and it's not like it ran on good things. It ran on all of the bad things over and over and over. I relate it to a Rolodex, which might show how old I am, but a Rolodex just continually spinning through each picture in my mind. And so my therapist taught me about mindfulness, of where if you revert back to your five senses, in the primal part of your mind, it overrides the thinking part of your mind. And so whenever you catch your mind doing that, you either pay attention to what you smell, touch something, pay attention to how it feels, pay attention to what you're looking at, what you're seeing, those senses, so sight, sound, taste, smell, feel. And so she said if it meant every minute, every second you were having to do that, then you do it. And eventually, if you're consistent with it and you stay with it, eventually you'll notice it's every hour. And then eventually you'll notice it's every day. Once a day you have to do that. And eventually you'll notice it's every week that you have to do that. And so I just trusted her, and I just did it because I was desperate. And so I can even remember the road that I was driving down about 6 months later, when I finally realized that I don't remember the last time I had to do that, because I had control back of my mind, and I was the one who was governing my thoughts, and I was living in the moment. I was living in the present. And so I can remember the road I was driving down when I had that aha moment or revelation of I felt free. I knew I wasn't perfect, and I still had a lot to do, but I finally felt free. So yeah, that was a major thing. So that with the Lord, and with having a good supportive grandfather. So and so it took about 1.5 years, but I did get custody back of my son. He did not transition for me. So when I attempted to take my own life, I had him in my custody, and I was not legally supposed to have him. And so they found him and me outside. He was 2.5, and he was wandering around by himself while I was passed out in a parking lot. And so it was never in the plan for me to get custody back. I'd kind of burned that bridge. And so he transitioned home with someone else. And on the last court date, the judge said I had done everything that I needed to do. I felt within me that if I just did what I needed to do, if I, represented myself in a positive way, if I did not, people were saying bad things about me. And so if I did not entertain the conversations, if I did not let that represent me in a way that I was not, if I just stayed my course and did what I needed to do, that it would work out for me. And so that's what I did. I just focused on me and doing what I needed to do. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue back. I didn't fight back. They knew I wanted my son. They knew that was a desire for me. And so on the last court date, 1.5 years later, the judge said he didn't know, why he was doing it exactly, and he had never done it before, but he was doing it today, and he awarded me full custody of my son. And now we're doing great. My son is an awesome kid, and he plays sports, and he is good in school, and he is well-mannered. He's a leader. And there were things that we had to overcome, when he was younger, and still today there's little traces that you can see. But every day we work together. He's fully aware of my story, because it's his story too. And he knows how important it is to share that to others, so that they can have hope for better, and to break the stigma, like the stigma of addiction, the stigma of mental health, and the stigma of foster care. I guess just you hear a lot of people say, why don't they just quit? And it makes you not you. And I don't know one addict that likes the way that they are living or where they're at, even if they say they do. Even if they're still choosing to use and say that they want to do that, they deep down, they cannot be enjoying that, because it is not a lifestyle that is enjoyable. And so I would just like for people to understand that, and understand that it took, I thought it would be better to die than to continue living that. And I thought it was that impossible to overcome, that I saw the only option was ending my own life. And so it is that hard. It is the hardest thing someone will ever do. And it feels like an impossible road. And so everyone who is fighting that journey and struggling with it, they need nothing but support and nothing but encouragement along the way, because they already feel that way inside. Like I said, I already felt defeated and I couldn't do it. And so I didn't need anyone else helping to point that out, because I already knew it inside. And so I needed someone to believe in me and to remind me that it's possible, and to share their journey with it, because I think if you have that lived experience and you can share that you're on the other side, it's just so much stronger, and it's so much more believable for someone who's in the trenches. When you're in the trenches, you might not always believe a textbook, or someone who's went to school for it. They're great. I love, professionals. But I felt like they didn't understand how far down I was in the hole. But someone who's been there does. And so I could believe their hope. I could believe their encouragement more. Everything that you think is impossible is possible. And that the life that you never thought was for you could be the life that you have. And I know, because the life that I have today, I never thought was in the cards or in the stars for me, and I never would have believed that it was. But I stand as a living testimony to say it's true. And so I just encourage them to continue fighting, and doing whatever it takes, and know that it's going to take everything. Like in AA, they say everything you put before sobriety, you'll lose to the addiction. And that's true. I believe that's true. Because it has to come first. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So, but it's worth it. And you're not gonna, even your kids. It may feel like you can't lose that time with your kids, or you have to put meetings before time with your kids, or things like that. But they get the time later, and they might not ever get it if you don't take the time now.